Isaiah 14, read Isaiah 14. I asked this to one of my brothers. I said, you want a good Bible study? Read Isaiah 14 and ask, who is the prophecy to, number one. Ask yourself, is there any translations that make this verse have a different nuance? Like, for example, if you don't know the Greek or the Hebrew, you're going to have to use different English translations to try to interpret it properly. And you say, well, why does this verse say shall and this other verse say hell? Why does this verse say, give me a different image in my imagination or my mind than the word hell does? Because most people, when you say hell, you automatically assume eternal flaming fire. But this is not always the proper translation. I know people that have been raised with the King James Version automatically imagine that when a verse is saying the word hell. And that's why you need to know or go back to the original, or you're going to have to just use a different translation and see why translations differ, why they differ. And so Isaiah 14, big deal. If you have some traditional views of this verse, you're going to think it's talking about Satan. And what kind of Satan? It's not just any Satan, because I believe that the word Satan in the Hebrew is adversary, and it could be anybody depending on the context. And so if you say, no, that's not true, there is a one cosmic Satan who has horns, has a red tail, a beard, and a pitchfork, and he's a spirit, and he's everywhere at the same time because he's tempting Christians all over the world. I say, no, that's the Catholic view. That's not the biblical view. There's nowhere in the Bible does that teach that. I'll give you one example. Again, Jesus called Peter Satan. Jesus called Peter Satan. Somebody says, well, he doesn't mean the literal Satan. I say, what do you mean the literal Satan? Why do you have a different view of Satan than Jesus had? The term means adversary. So at that moment, Peter was his enemy, was his adversary. And Jesus actually explains it. He says, because you do not think of the things of God, you are thinking of the things of men. That's the reason why he's Satan. That's why he's the enemy of God incarnate. Okay? So if you're not taking Jesus's use of the word and using it the way he did, then you're not using it correctly. You're not thinking biblically. You're thinking traditionally. You're thinking like a Catholic would. Okay, I'll give you some biblical scholars that most people respect on their vicious study of the Word of God. Number one, John Calvin from 1509, 1564. He's a Reformed theologian. He called the Satan interpretation of Isaiah 14 as ignorance and insisted the context refers only to the king of the Babylonians. That's it. Matthew Henry, 1662 from 1714. He says he's a nonconformist commentator. He treated the passage as the literal pride and fall of the Babylonian king, without a reference to some spiritual being or cosmic spiritual being. John Gill, 1697 to 1771, he's a Baptist theologian, stated it's not to be understood of the fall of Satan, but a continuation addressing the human king of Babylon. Very simple. Context is everything. Adam Clarke, 1762 to 1832, he's a Methodist commentator, declared that the text, quote, speaks nothing at all concerning Satan nor his fall, but only to the pride of Nebuchadnezzar. Albert Barnes, 1798 to 1870, he's a Presbyterian scholar, focused on the human king's aspiration to deity-like status, with no cosmic Satan element in mind. I have 90 plus scholars here. I'm not going to quote them all, but just to give you a taste of that, you got to ask yourself when you're doing Bible study, why does people interpret this verse that way? Why are they using words defined differently than the original authors would have used it? Why do they do that? You say, why am I thinking this when I read this passage? What other verses back up my interpretation here, right? And so this is where we really have to challenge popular viewpoints. Or else. What are you living for? You living for traditions of men? You living for Jesus? You really want to know what Jesus meant, what Jesus taught? Do you really want to know what the apostles taught and how they meant it? Or are we just comfortable stuck in our tradition? The only way we're going to impact the world in any way is we buck the traditions of men. We have to buck it, and we have to go in line with what the apostles and Jesus taught, regardless of all opposition. Okay? We got to do it. We can do it, and we will do it.